All right, 1 second. All right, so welcome to this Q&A. Again, want to welcome on to this Q&A. Just want to give out shout to my middle daughter, just gave birth in the middle of the night to a healthy baby boy. So another grandson, had a granddaughter 2 weeks ago. So Kaufman family here in Israel is getting expanding. Whatever, Baruch Hashem. So I want to give them a shout out. Everyone's good. Again, we're going to this Q&A. Don't want the gray hair, fool you. Still young at heart, so they keep me young. That's very good. All right. So again, we're going to this Q&A. Yeah, a couple questions came in. We'll deal with them. Whatever, interesting questions. I mean, they're all interesting. Someone asks, what are the halachic concerns and issues involving surrogacy? Someone used a surrogate mother, right? With the either with their own eggs, or let's say a surrogate mother's egg, let's say. Also, how does Judaism in general approach infertility within marriage? And the third question was, woman freezes her eggs before converting. Will the kids from those eggs be converted, still have to convert, even though their mother now is Jewish? And thinking about the eggs that live in her body, because women are have a limited amount of eggs. So what are the? So let's get to the first question here. What are the halachic concerns involving surrogacy? Surrogacy, as it is called, it's basically using another body to have a child, whether it's their egg or the woman's egg, let's say, the mother or the mother to be or whatever that wants this child, that can't have this child for whatever reason. So the question was, what are some of the concerns? So main concern is who's considered the mother, right? That is basically that's going to be the main concern over here, because you're going to have to determine. Well, first it's got whose egg is it, and even let's say it's the egg of somebody not carrying the child, right? Let's say it's her egg, but the other woman's body. Yeah. In other words, this woman cannot carry full term or carry any term, right? Let's say, but she has eggs, right? So if her eggs can be used in someone else's body, right? Or yeah, let's say that's the case, right? What's the question, right? What are halachic concerns? Main concern is who's the mother. That is the main concern. Obviously, regular childbirth, right? You're going to have conception and childbirth within the same person, right? That's usually how it works if there are no problems. So therefore, the mother, whoever conceives and gets pregnant, is going to be the genetic mother and the birth mother, right? The question is going to be, what do you do if they're two separate women? How do you determine maternity over here? How do you determine who the mother is? Right? Do you go after the one that's carrying the baby? And if that mother's not Jewish, then child's not Jewish. Or do you go by whose egg it is, regardless of the body? Right? So whatever. That's gonna be the main question, right? In other words, is the mother defined by the woman who delivered the baby, or the woman who contributed genetic materials, right? That's that's basically the question. So we understand that if the mother's Jewish, The baby's Jewish, right? The child will be Jewish. But the question is going to be, in this case, what's the Jewish status over here? Does it go by the egg? Does it go by person carried? So this is a question, that certainly has come up and has been dealt with, over many decades. And there are a lot of implications, right? The main implication is what's the status of the child, right? What is the status of that child? So the most widely accepted opinion, just, flush it out a little bit, is that the surrogate alone, the one who's carrying the baby, is considered the legal mother. So you got major rabbinic authorities hold that. My Rabbi holds that. Since Eliezer of Waldenberg holds that. Whatever, a lot of great people hold that. And what's the source? Where do they get it from? Where do they know? Where do they know that? So one is the biblical account of Yosef and Dinah. The Targum, the Aramaic translation, Targum Yonason, or Yonason ben Uziel, right, who gave a running commentary on the Torah in Aramaic, that he says, interesting, Leah gave birth to 6 sons, right? Leah has 6 sons, 2 maidservants each gave birth to 2 sons, and Leah prophesied she was pregnant with another son, and Rachel was pregnant with a daughter. So what happens? Leah did not want Rachel to have a lesser share, so to speak, than the maidservants. So what did she do? She prayed the fetus to be switched. Right? She prayed that Rachel should have a boy, that she should have a girl. Right? So this transfer, so to speak, how'd that work? This uterine, let's say intrauterine, that's what we'll call it, I guess. How was that performed? It was done miraculously, and they switched. Leah gave birth to a daughter, i.e. Dinah, and Rachel gave birth to a son. Right? It was that son we know as Yosef. So what determines, according to this, very simple, what determines maternity over here? Who the mother is? Well, you see, conception doesn't play any role over here. It doesn't seem like it. Leah conceived Yosef, but gave birth to Dinah. Right? Now, who is known as Dinah's mother? Torah says very clear, Leah. Right? Leah is known as Dinah's mother. Very good. Yeah, so Rachel seemed to conceive Dinah, but who did she give birth to? Yosef. So who's the mother? The mother is considered Yosef. But other commentaries say, wait a minute, how can you use this medrash? Normally, you never use a medrash to derive halacha in general, right? Usually, it's never the case. Anyone who tells you otherwise has no idea how Jewish law works, right? It's what we might call, let's say, anecdotal source. It's very, it has, statements like it does in the Gemara. For whatever reason, these things did not make it into the Gemara. Okay, but they have no legal binding, right? They have zero legal binding over here. So we do understand that the birth mother is the halachic mother, right? The Gemara in Yevamos 97b speaks about it. You had 2 twin brothers. Mother converted to Judaism during pregnancy. Right? Now, these 2 twin brothers, are forbidden to marry each other. Why? Marry each other's wives. And they don't do chalitza. They don't perform chalitza to the widow. In other words, if a husband dies, and he had no children, right? So they do yibum. Yibum was known as you had another brother, usually the oldest brother, would marry the widow and have a child, and that child, if it's a boy, then you name after the dead husband, right? That is yibum. We don't do yibum anymore. We do what we call chalitza. It's whatever. That's not very common, right? And when it is common, they publicize it so people can actually witness it. I saw one. I went and saw one, but it's very not common, right? But it can happen. So basically, chalitza means that the woman comes in and She has to wear a certain type of shoe, and she has to spit, and whatever. It's a whole thing, right? It's a whole thing. So, in order to free the widow from the obligation, allow her to marry outside the first husband's family, right? So the brother of the deceased has to perform chalitza. Now you look at that Gemara, you say, okay, very good. So what's it telling me? Right? What's it telling me? That birth determines maternity. Right? Now, what does chalitza do over here, technically? What does it do? It only applies to brothers that have a common father. Yeah, so even though the prohibition, brothers marrying each other's wives, let's say, why would that be forbidden? In what case? Case is where they have a common mother. Now, what happens when a person converts? They sever all pre-existing familial ties. In other words, if a whole family converts, right? A whole family converts, what happens? The kids technically are not related to parents anymore. They're considered like a katan shenolad dummy, like a child like a newborn baby. Even though they're blood related, very good, they're not related spiritually. So even though they're related spiritually, nonetheless, the brothers cannot marry each other's wives. That prohibition still applies, right? Because again, what's the issue? The issue is they are born to a common Jewish woman. Now, in this case, even though the mother wasn't Jewish at the time of conception, when was she Jewish? She becomes Jewish at the time of she becomes Jewish. She becomes Jewish after, when her sons are born. In other words, she's already Jewish when her sons are born. So very good. So she's Jewish when her sons are born. The kids are going to be considered Jews. So again, what do I learn out from here in general? That birth determines maternity. That means whoever the birth mother is, in our case, the surrogate, will be considered the legal mother. Also, child from a woman, let's say, who converted the Jews during pregnancy, also both Jewish and her heir. In other words, she becomes Jewish. Let's say the child wasn't conceived when she was Jewish. So that doesn't seem to matter. If the mother becomes Jewish before the child is born, the child is Jewish. Does not need to go through any conversion, right? Or anything else, right? Because we hold in general, there is a Talmudic dictum, we'll just mention this, that it's uber yerech imo, which means that the fetus is regarded as a limb of the pregnant woman, i.e. a physical part of the surrogates. Right? So in other words, whoever's giving birth, that's the bottom line here, whoever's giving birth, right, is going to be considered, it's going to be considered the mother, right? That's basically how it works. Now, there is an issue, maybe there's an issue, doesn't matter whose eggs they are. Right? Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters over here is the fact who gives birth. So if the mother, let's say, the mother is Jewish. The mother's not Jewish. Right? So then it would come out that the child themselves would not be considered Jewish. Yeah, regardless, even if it was a Jewish woman's egg, doesn't matter. Right? We don't go by the egg. What do we go by? We go by who gives birth, right? So that is basically the main concern with that. The other question related to, before I get to infertility, was if a woman froze her eggs, let's say before converting. Yeah, well, all the kids born from those eggs after she converted still have to convert. No, right? So simple answer is, if she's already Jewish, the status of her eggs, if she froze her eggs before she was Jewish, has no relevance, right? Seemingly has no relevance. Now, why does it have any relevance? Because we go after birth, right? So she uses those eggs, let's say later, and she's already Jewish, then there's no problem. Then there's no problem. Why is there no problem? Because she's Jewish, right? You go after the birth, right? That's simple. That's a simple explanation. So if she's already Jewish and she's using these eggs, very good, right? So then the kid would be Jewish, male, female, doesn't matter, right? And that'll have many ramifications, right? I.e., somebody dies, they can inherit, right? They're 100% Jewish because the mother is Jewish. So it doesn't really matter what that the eggs were frozen before she converted. Yeah, that has no relevance over here because again we go after the birth. So if the woman's Jewish, they put the eggs back in, very good. She conceives, everything's good. Okay, so then the child's Jewish. Yeah, otherwise that would not be not the case. Yeah. So you go after the birth, right? That's really the bottom line. So regardless of when the eggs were done, or eggs were put away or not, whether she was Jewish or not, it doesn't matter, right? It seems that's an irrelevant point. So that was the related question to that. Then there's the question, how does Judaism in general approach infertility? So we learn out from the story of Avram and Sarah that they are married for 10 years. They are married for 10 years and they don't have kids. So what does Sarah say? She says, take Hagar. If I can't give birth, right? If I can't have children, and God had changed her nature, she was not. She was born, I think, without a womb. It would be impossible for her to get, to conceive. So God changed her nature, changed her name, changed her nature, in order for her to have a child. So what do you learn out from this? So you learn out, and the halacha is that a person married for 10 years and his wife doesn't give birth, doesn't have a child, or let's say can't have a child, or whatever the case is, then he can really, divorce her and marry someone else who can have kids. Right? That is on the books. That is the halacha. Now, so now the question is, what about fertility treatments? Yeah. Now let's say in this case, fertility treatments are not an option. Like, in other words, the doctors say they got 4 or 5 different opinions. And the conclusion is they'll never have natural kids. Yeah. They'll never have children. Let's say better. They'll never have children. Yeah. And in vitro is not going to work in this case. All right, let's say. Now, let's be a little more optimistic. Let's say in general, this person will never conceive. This woman will never conceive. So really, what they could do is do in vitro. Right now, in vitro could work. Yeah, let's say in vitro could work. So, it's very taxing on the woman. So it's very expensive to do, but they can do in vitro. Yeah, they can do in vitro. Okay. Now, what if in vitro doesn't work? In vitro is not a guarantee. Yeah, so, it depends on a lot of different factors. One of them for sure will be age. If for sure will be age, I know someone tried to do in vitro in the late 30s and it didn't go. And sometimes even if they're younger, maybe it won't go. So then in that case, what do you do? Let's say you tried in vitro, it didn't work. Do you keep trying? Or this is an option. This is an option. You have surrogate mother. That certainly could be an option. Yeah, then obviously the child will probably have to convert, but that's an option, potentially an option. Or another option is to adopt. Right? In other words, you just give up hope and you find a child to adopt. Right? Also not so easy. Depending if you want a Jewish child, let's say. Jewish child not so easy to get, as I understand. But if you get a non-Jewish child, okay, then have to go through conversion, as well. But Oh, that's another option. And the last option is you don't stay together, you get divorced. That's the last option, right? Now now the question is, is a person going to do that? It's the halacha is, technically speaking, someone will pin me down and say, well, what happens, 10 years go by and you don't have kids? Now, the question is, who's the problem here, right? Could be the problem with the guy, but let's say it's a problem with the woman. We'll make it, we'll blame her, right? We'll make it, right? We'll make it easy. Yeah, so let's say it's her issue. Okay. Now, even if it's her issue, per se, there is an option, right? The option is after 10 years to see this is what happened with Avram and Sarah, that Sarah gave Hagar to Avram, and you see that she conceived, right? And the whole story, the whole story with that, right? Or, so meaning that after 10 years, really, there's no obligation to stay together. Yeah? There's no obligation. Now, someone will say, if you're married, like, let's say you're young. Let's say when you got married older. You're relatively young, healthy, whatever. Yeah? People think, okay, it's biology 101, 101A. Yeah? And what happens? What should happen? Two people get together, a man and woman, which will make this simple. They get together, all things being equal, and she should get pregnant, right? It's, but there is infertility. There for sure is infertility. Yeah, that for sure exists. Okay. Now, even with that, even with that, would somebody tell them, guy comes in front of him, comes in front of a rabbi, let's say, or they both come in, let's say they both come together also, and they ask this question, do they have to get divorced? Now, I don't think too many people would say, yeah, you have an absolute obligation to get divorced. Yeah, it's on the guy to have children. A woman doesn't have an obligation to have children, right? We've spoken about this. A man has an obligation to have children, but guess what? He can't do it without a woman, right? Again, this is biology here, 101 or 101A. So the woman needs to help the husband, obviously have children. And what if he can't? What if? So that's his obligation. It's his obligation. Now, he can make a choice and say, he may love his wife very much, but he wants to have a child, right? He wants to have a natural child. He doesn't want to adopt. Or maybe he doesn't want to adopt, but he still wants a natural child. Yeah? He wants to be able to fulfill that obligation, right? And to this woman, it doesn't seem like it's going to happen. Yeah? It does not seem like it's going to happen. And he can decide on the books, to leave, right? Because she can't have kids. Now, someone will ask the question we spoke about marriage, I think last week or a few weeks back. Yeah. Someone may ask, well, that's the only purpose of a woman is to have children. I mean, if you look what the Torah says, it's not our only purpose. Certainly not our only purpose. Yeah. But women are supposed to have children. Supposed to bring, even by non-Jews. Women have to have children. Why do they have to have children? Because you have to populate the world. And what happens if you don't populate the world? The world can't function. You need people to do things. Medial work, non-medial work. If you don't, you don't have enough people to do things, the whole place will go to pot. Nothing will happen. Right? The whole place, you won't be able to do anything. You don't have enough personnel. Right? So therefore, it's an obligation for Jews and non-Jews to have kids. By non-Jews, it's a lot easier. They can have a lot fewer kids and use things that, to prevent having kids and this and that. Okay. Yeah, Jews a little more, it's more complicated. I don't want to really get into it. But, it is more complicated in that sense. But there's an obligation to have kids, period. Right? There is an obligation to have kids. Now, how many kids you have to have, good for, if you're a Jew person, trying to have a boy and a girl. Right? That's how it comes out. You should have a boy and a girl. What if you had, I was just telling someone, a friend of mine had 8 boys. Right? He had 8 boys, didn't have a girl. So that part he didn't fulfill. They didn't have a girl. Okay. What if a person has all girls? I know someone had like, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 girls, and then the other had a boy. They made that Friday night, like, invited the community, the Shalom Zacher, they invite the community, whatever, like, it was like a wedding because the first boy had 10 girls. Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's obligation to populate the world. Now you could say how many kids you have to have, and Orthodox Jews have too many kids, and how can two parents want so many kids, and it's not fair for them. And okay, that's not the issue. That's not the issue over here. We can discuss it, but that's not the issue. That's not the issue. The problem is, what if she can't give birth? What if she can't have kids? Right? It's impossible for her to have kids. Yeah. Now, do you have to get divorced? I had someone tell me that, it's a second marriage or whatever. He never had kids. His wife can't have kids. Right? Second marriage, his wife can't have kids. He said, I really want to have kids. I said, so get divorced. If you're gonna convert, get divorced, then do that. It depends how strong an issue it is. According to halacha, you could get divorced because you can't have kids. Okay. Now that is the main thing for a woman to have children. Most women today, and I've spoken about this, I want to really harp on it. Most women today want to have at least one child, one natural child. Yeah, natural. That's the norm. That's the nature. That's the nature of a woman, whether it's just one or two or just one, whatever it is, at least one. At least one. Again, some can't do that. I know somebody got married much later. Had they got married earlier, they would have known that they had issues. That would have been a different thing if they got married early. The person got married earlier, but they didn't. Right? Most women that get married or not, most women should be able to conceive. That's just what should happen according to nature. But there are women that don't. Right? Or they have difficulty. Right? Let's say not impossible, but let's say they have a lot of difficulty. So obviously, people think, okay, I'll wait, wait, I'll see the world, I'll work, I'll make money, I'll do this, I'll do that, before I decide to have a family. Okay. Then, biological clock, ticks, they get in their 30s, they decide. Let's say they settle down in their early 30s. Is that a guarantee they're going to have kids? Not necessarily a guarantee. It'd be easier. Or they get married 37. So I know somebody got married 37, 38. Had they got married, let's say in their 20s, I'm not saying just to get married, whatever, but let's say they would have been more serious about dating or whatever, got married earlier, they could have had, potentially could have had natural kids. Potentially. Yeah, they would have found out there were issues. Okay. And then, see where it goes. But when you're 37, 38, and you're trying this, it's not a guarantee. Certainly not a guarantee. It's much harder. Definitely much harder when you're older. So this person told me they weren't Jewish, but he said, I really want to have children. Natural children. Yeah. They wasn't really an option. They didn't really want to adopt. They want to have a natural child. So I said that you can't stay married. I wouldn't tell someone to do that. I mean, it's an important thing. You want to have kids, okay. Right? I don't think most rabbis, two people come in front of them, 10 years that they don't have kids and, in vitro didn't work and different things. They're just going to say, you know what, you should get divorced. Right? It's more important to have kids than stay married and get divorced. I can't imagine. Can't imagine too many people would say that. But what if the guy says it's extremely important for me to have kids? I understand. Person wants to have a continuation, next generation. Okay. A natural continuation. Not adopting. Yeah. Again, all things being equal, I still don't think someone's going to tell them to do it. Yeah. Now, if the person insists and he says it's the most important thing to me, and his wife agrees, or whatever. Okay, that's their decision. Is it healthy to do? Is it a healthy thing to get divorced in such a case? I wouldn't tell people to do it. Yeah. You say, I exhausted everything. I exhausted all my options. In vitro did a bunch of times. Now it's too, it's on cost. It's too expensive to do whatever, and they don't want to. They don't want to adopt. You could adopt. That's an option. But let's say they don't want to adopt. Right now, the question is, what's the halacha here? What do they do? It depends. Right? It depends. If it's the most important thing this person will do, this guy will do, then he should get divorced. If he wants to have kids, she can't have kids, so go somewhere else. Go try and find someone else and have kids. That's a possibility, right? That is definitely a distinct possibility, right? Or you just stay married, but you don't have kids. Yeah. So the Torah. So the question is, what's the general approach? It's a very hard test. It's a very, very hard test. And the reason is very simple, because most, Orthodox communities, whether modern or ultra Orthodox or Hasidic or Chabad or, whatever, most people have at least 6 kids. Right? That's about the average. Right? Let's say. So imagine, a person gets married. Let's say one gets married, I don't know, 20. She gets married at 20. She sees all her friends having kids one after another. Right? Okay. Raising kids not easy either. Yeah, and people complain that that they're tired. They were up half the night, and this kid did this, and this kid did that, and that they still don't have kids. A very, very big test, right? Another big test is, let's say a person got married, had a child, very good, and they have secondary infertility. That's even harder, in a certain way, because here they had a child. Yeah, they had a child, but now now it's not going, so to speak. Right? It's a huge test. It's a huge test, especially, you live in an Orthodox community, because everything's around having kids, right? Building families. That's what it is. And there's birthday parties, other things, milestone events, and they still don't have kids. It's a very big test. A very, very big test. And a person, I know somebody, I don't know, 20 years? More than 20 years they had a child. Yeah. Everyone gave up hope, whatever. Somehow, somebody had a child after 20 years. 20 years of marriage. But it's a big test. It's a huge test. Yeah. Not to mention, if a person, and this is mostly on the woman, if she's doing things to try and conceive it, whatever. It's taxing on the body also. Forget expense. Expense is another thing. Right? It's very much taxing on the body. I know there's Shlomo Zalman Auerbach of blessed memory, one of the Torah giants, according to everybody, in the last generation. And a number of his sons never had kids. They never had kids. And I mean, they became Torah giants in their own right. Yeah, but they never married to have kids. I know one of his sons that his wife was not interested in in doing in vitro. They didn't adopt. They didn't adopt either, right? But his wife wasn't interested, putting herself through that, and so they never had kids. They're great people that never had kids, so they consider like all their students like their kids, because they never had they never had natural kids. It's a big test. It's there. Listen, person's tested a lot of things. Person can be tested with health. Person can be tested with livelihood. Person can be tested with all all kinds of things. This is a big test. Especially if the Jewish communities that people live in, if they if the main thing, one of the main things about kids and everything revolving around kids. In general, this is huge. This is it's a test for some people, right? For some people, it'll be unbearable, right? Because here a person sees friends and friends they grew up with, this and that, big families and having one child after another, this and that. Okay, very good, and they're like, nothing's doing. So it's very disconcerting. B is like kind of walking on eggshells in a certain way. like certain topics, maybe not to bring up. It's like somebody, who's much older hasn't gotten married. And most of their friends have gotten married. Yeah, it's also hard. Because, what will people say to this person? They may say, well, you're being too picky, this and that. Nobody wants to hear that. They're about the right person, yeah. Yeah, you can marry anyone, it's not really a big issue. It's not true. It's definitely not true. But, some people will say, someone's wedding, maybe they have a sibling got married or whatever, or they see him at a different wedding, and they'll say, Mirza Hashem by you. Like, with God's help by you. Like, that's very disconcerting. They don't want to hear that. They feel like everyone else can get married. Why can't I get married? Like, what's wrong with me? It doesn't give them strength, right? So in any of these cases, a person has to be extremely, extremely sensitive. Extremely sensitive. Yeah, that's what to say. I think the reason's very simple because it's painful. Right? It's very, very painful. And if one of the main things in the Jewish community, is it's about having kids, and people have large families. Let's say, with all that, they're not even starting out. They have nothing. Or let's say they do have a child, and then 5-6 years later go by, nothing doing. All of this concerning, right? So you can say, well, we shouldn't be measured. Person could say, we shouldn't be measured by how many kids we have. Okay. Person should be measured how much money they have, or they don't have, or, there are many things. Maybe we shouldn't be measured by. Yeah, I'm not saying what the community does is right, per se. Yeah, because one of the first questions, people ask, and you got to be careful also. Because, if a person met someone for the first time, I'm not so sure, unless you see they have kids, to ask them, oh, how many kids you have? And they say 0. Right? That's like conversation end. Right? It's a good way to kill a conversation. You didn't know that. You didn't have intention to make them feel bad or whatever, but you got to be sensitive. You definitely have to be, sensitive. It's a very hard topic. It's a very, very hard topic, because someone has, over the years tried, and they've been unsuccessful. And it's just, there are major letdowns, major, major letdowns. And then, like, going to any of these things, a person has a niece, nephew, cousins, whatever, going to a bris or a kiddush for a girl or this and that, it can be very hard sometimes. Maybe a lot of times it can be very hard. Why? Because they're not measuring it up. Now you can say, who cares how many kids you have? Right? What difference does it make? Right? Let's say a person only had 4 kids. Okay. Or a person only had 3 kids. Let's say either that was their decision, what they can handle, maybe there are other things going on. Okay. But for better or for worse, that conversation comes up. Right? So a person has to have extreme sensitivity, because you speak to someone that doesn't have kids. They've been married for a number of years. Yeah. You don't want to all of a sudden bring up, it's like, oh, did you ever try this? Did you try that? Did you try, depending what a person's connection is, right? Bottom line, it's a very painful topic, right? It can be an extremely, difficult topic. But as we said before, on the books, could a person get divorced after 10 years? They could. Right? All things being equal, I wouldn't tell someone to do it. Just like I wouldn't tell someone, if they're married and they're happily married, to get divorced. Because one spouse wants to convert and the other doesn't. Now, if they were going to get divorced anyway, that's a different issue. That's a very different issue. Yeah, but, some people say this is the most important thing, and either they're with me or not with me. Okay, even if they're not with you, that's, and all things being equal, everything else is more or less okay. Yeah, I wouldn't tell anyone to get divorced. I know the story without any of the details, but the person said, I'm very glad I'm Jewish, but I lost my spouse in the process. Again, they're very happy what they did. and where they're holding and, and all that. But at the same time, they paid a price, right? They paid a price. Is it not up to God? Somebody asks whether a person has a child or not. Of course it's up to God. God will determine if he's supposed to have kids or not. Yeah. But I'm saying you put your best foot forward. Let's say the doctors tell you, going through the normal way of having children, we'll keep this clean. Yeah. They can't have kids. Now the question is that just a decree from God? Or do I have to put my best foot forward and try to have kids? Yeah. Now, even putting your best foot forward trying to have kids is not a guarantee. 100% is not a guarantee. In vitro doesn't work all the time. It depends on a lot of different factors. Yeah, age being one of them, right? So even if it doesn't, it doesn't mean it can't work, right? But this is an interesting question. Is that going against God's divine plan? Are you playing with nature over here? Right? So we hold that's all playing with nature. Right? That's all playing with God's creation. That's putting your best foot forward. Right? God can bless it or not bless it. Right? God can say, okay, up until this point, you didn't have kids. You want to try doing this and that. God can say, okay, another 5 years, I'm not going to let you have kids. But after that, I see certain things, I'll let you have kids. Yeah? Or not. Ultimately, you're right. It is up to God, 100%. And it could be no matter what you do, God can say, no. And what happens if God says no? So no matter what you do, it doesn't help. Right? But that's not considered, playing with nature and trying to trying to go against God himself. That's not what it's talking about. It's for sure not what it's talking about. Because even if a person does it, that's putting your best foot forward. Okay. According to Torah, you're allowed to do that. Right? And you'd be obligated to do that. What if it doesn't work? And then what happens? You run out of money. Yeah, these treatments are expensive. Yeah, so let's say you run out of money. Then what? Yeah, so then a person will say, well, maybe we'll go, maybe we'll adopt. Does that mean 100% after the fact, what they tried didn't work, that it'll never work? No. I mean, it'll never work. I mean, it'll never work. Right? But at the end of the day, God's the one who determines, right? So, but again, putting your best foot forward does not mean you're spitting in God's face over here. God forbid. That's not what it means. You're doing whatever you can, to try and do this. Even if you're doing in vitro or other things, that's fine. That 100% is fine. Now, God can say on that, no. God can make a decree no matter what you do. Yeah? That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. Yeah? You got to put your best foot forward, and then eventually you put your best foot forward, it didn't work. Right? The person saying, but it's an extremely important mitzvah to do. True. But it'll be a mitzvah you didn't do. So again, someone will pin me down. Could you get divorced in such a case? You could. Let's say after 10 years. Should you? It's a different issue. It'll be like a mitzvah you didn't do. Some people think, just on this train of thought, some people think, not every marriage, forget about I'm not talking about getting divorced, but at least at this point, right? Not every marriage is perfect. You got to work, it's something you got to really work at, and other things can happen in between, and, a person goes through different traumas and different difficulties, put a tremendous strain, on a marriage. But sometimes the person will think, I have this heart, I don't like this, I don't like that. You know what? It's not going to change. It's not going to get any better. No therapy is going to help. But let's say it's true. Let's say. Yeah, it's not going to get divorced. Okay. So they end up getting divorced. What's the person realize that their spouse might not have been perfect? Okay. Yeah, and they maybe had some, serious issues to deal with. Okay. But they find out after getting divorced, it's not so simple to get remarried. Not so simple. I'm not saying that's the reason to stay in a bad marriage. Right? But I would say some people make a serious mistake. They get, let's say they marry someone else. Let's say they find someone else. Very good. Now, is that person going to be perfect for them? Like, they're never going to argue? Everything's bliss, They stayed married happily ever after. They never had a fight. Not true. People argue, people fight, They'll find other things they don't like about the person. That, idiosyncrasies and different things. Okay. Nothing's perfect. Nothing's perfect over here. Right? But a person may think, you know what, the grass is greener. Let me see. Let me see. And what's the harsh reality they find out? Yeah, even if they find someone to marry, let's say they find someone to marry, that person's going to have other issues. I'm not saying they brought all this baggage with them. I'm just saying in general, they can have other issues that irk a person, that annoy a person, this and that. They don't see eye to eye on, right? So you trade one set of issues for another set of issues. Again, I'm not talking about a toxic marriage. I'm talking about where someone really should get divorced, right? But they think, okay, they have certain character traits, certain things. How hard should it be for me to find someone to marry? Depending. Let's say it's not so hard, okay. When a person marries, you're trading a whole different set of values, different things. Is it going to be perfect in your eyes? Nothing's perfect. Nothing's 100% perfect. But you might find, other issues that, wow, in the first marriage, I didn't have these issues. Yeah, these issues, we're fine. In this marriage, you got other issues to deal with. Okay, second marriage, is much more difficult than the first marriage. In general. In vitro surrogacy isn't forbidden. I didn't say it's forbidden. We say that. We only brought up what certain halachic issues there are. It doesn't say you can't do it. Many rabbinic authorities say you can't do it. The only question is, first of all, in vitro is not forbidden. Yeah, that's for sure. The only question by surrogacy is the question's going to be who determines who the mother is. That's the question. Yeah, so if you go by the birth mother, let's say the birth mother's not Jewish. Okay, that child has to convert, right? That's the main thing. No one said it's forbidden. We didn't say it was forbidden. The question is, what's the status of the child, right? That was the question, right? That was the question with that, but we didn't say it was forbidden, right? 100%, we didn't say it was forbidden. The only question is the status of the child. Seems to be unethical practice, homosexuals purchasing eggs. That's a whole different thing. Right, paying surrogate mother, supermodels paying surrogate mother. Yeah, that's the problem. That is the problem. Yeah, we're talking about a normal relationship. I don't know if YouTube will ban me for saying this. A normal relationship is a man and a woman. That's a normal relationship. Yeah, you even need the President of the United States to say there are two sexes, male and female. They're pretty pathetic. Whatever you think about them, they have passed legislation to say that there's only two sexes. Okay. Yeah. Can the idea of surrogacy be totally abused? Yes. 100% it can be totally abused. Yeah, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about where a man and a woman cannot have children. Yeah. They're married according to the Torah. Keeping Torah values, they can't have children, or they have difficulty having children. This is an option. Surrogacy is an option. In vitro, if it would work, is an option. Yeah, adoption is an option. Yeah, these other things totally abused, right? Totally abused. I'm not talking about any of those issues, right? Right. But using eggs for other things that are just like way out there. That's not our issue. I'm not even addressing that issue. Yeah. But if you're doing that, the question is, would that be forbidden in Jewish home? Absolutely. Absolutely be forbidden. Yeah. Someone who's a homosexual is not going to be an Orthodox Jew. There are people, unfortunately, have issues. Spoken about this. They have issues, but they want to be religious. Yeah. They want to be Orthodox Jews. I just got contacted by someone recently, and they were Reformed. They want to be Orthodox, but they're going through transgender. I said, stay Reform or conservative. It's just it's a huge mess. Yeah, But there are people that say, I really want to be religious, but they have an issue with this. They have an issue. It's an unnatural thing according to the Torah. Yeah. And most people have some sort of mental health issue. That's also been proven. Doesn't mean it can't be dealt with. Homosexuals, there are, psychologists out there that can't help them. And certainly, can't help them. But at the end of the day, and at the end of the day, they want to be an Orthodox Jew, but they're doing that. That's a problem. That's a serious problem. Yeah, and most on themselves say, I wish I was straight. What can I do? This is what I feel, and whatever. But they wish they were quote unquote normal. Doesn't matter if they're out there LGBTQ and all this and all that. They wish they were normal. Yeah, that's what's been proven through all this. Yeah, so I'll tell people they want to go through this or they have gone through this or whatever. So, we're not the address. You have a lot more problems. There are a lot more problems with this. Person changes body parts, which doesn't mean anything. We've spoken about this before. Where do you put them in the synagogue? They were originally a guy. Now they're dressed as a woman and they have other parts added to them. How can you sit them with men? That side of the mechitza, the way they're dressed. Yeah, even let's say they don't change body parts, but they change the total prohibition. Men can't wear women's clothing. They're men, they're biological men. No matter what you do, you take off body parts, you add body parts, doesn't matter. Biologically, the person's a man, doesn't change. Or a woman, doesn't change. It doesn't change. So now they walk in the synagogue, what do you do with them? What in the world do you do with them? It's a big problem. They can't put on tefillin. They can't put on tefillin. Are they really men? Or they're not men? It's a big problem. Someone told me, I shouldn't laugh, but someone said they contacted a modern Orthodox synagogue, like pretty modern Orthodox synagogue, and they didn't know what to do with them. They're like, we don't want it. It's too problematic. So I'll tell people go Reform and Conservative, but they say I don't want to go Reform and Conservative. I want to be an Orthodox Jew, but you're classified as someone who's very, very different. Very, very different. This is a big problem. It's a huge problem. Yeah. Let's just leave it at that. Somebody asked, when does Shabbat start for a married couple, family with children? When the woman lights candles. When she lights candles, then, for her kids and herself, it's Shabbos, unless she makes a condition. Unless she makes a condition, she's not taking on Shabbos till right before sundown or whatever. For a guy, if he's married, Shabbos comes, even if he lights candles, Shabbos comes when either when he starts the evening service or when he starts Chadodi. Or he starts, let's say, Kabbalah Shabbos, let's say better. He starts the beginning of those Psalms you say by Kabbalat Shabbat. That's when for him Shabbos starts. He doesn't, just because his wife lit candles doesn't mean it's Shabbos for him. Yeah, for her and for the kids in general would be Shabbos for them. Right? That's when Shabbos would start. For him, it only start later. It only starts either by Kabbalat Shabbat or by starting the evening service. So he gives birth. Someone asks, so who gives birth? It's the mother, and if the mother is Jewish. Whoever gives birth, right? Let's make clear. Whoever gives birth to the mother, if the surrogate mother is Jewish, the child's Jewish. Yeah. That's the bottom line. Whoever gives birth, that woman, that mother, let's say, of this child, if the mother is not Jewish, the child's not Jewish. If the mother is Jewish, then the child is Jewish. Surrogate is Jewish, child is Jewish, right. Surrogacy is allowed, I just said it is. If that's the only other option. In vitro is better. What if in vitro you can't do? What if a woman's body is just, you won't be able to do it? A woman will not be able to carry term. If she can't carry term, what should she do? There are two options. Or three options. One is you don't have children. That's it. Second option is you adopt. Third, let's say better. That's the last option. Third option is to adopt. Second option would be to do a surrogate mother. That's it. Those are the only options. Now, they don't want to do a surrogate mother and they can't have children. The other option is to adopt. They don't want to adopt, then they can't have kids. They don't want to have kids. But surrogacy is allowed. We said that. Yeah. If the surrogate child is not from the husband's seed, well, that's where it should be from. That's exactly where it should. Is it considered a child? If his wife is a child from, no, it's her child. Let's say it's her egg, right? Make it a little bit interesting. It's her egg, but it's not her husband's seed. So who's the father? The father's somebody else. Yeah, there was a story of somebody, of a doctor that, and I don't know, supposedly fathered like, 70, more than 70 kids or whatever. Instead of using the husband's sperm, he used his own. Whatever, kind of crazy thing, but that's what he did. Yeah. So it becomes his child. It's not the husband's sperm. If it's not the husband's sperm, then it's his child. It's whoever, sorry, let's say better. Whoever's sperm it is, they are the father. But remember, even if the father's a non-Jew and the surrogate mother is a Jew, the child's still Jewish. The child will still be Jewish, right? In that case. So if that, let's say that happened, right? Make it even more confusing. Let's say that happens. It was not the father's sperm, yeah? Did he fulfill the obligation of having a child? No. He doesn't know. Let's say he never found out. He thinks this is his child. But it's not, right? Essentially, it's not, right? So he didn't fulfill his obligation. There was a story many years ago. Many years ago. A woman didn't do in vitro. She didn't do surrogacy. She did in vitro, I think. She did in vitro, had twins. Both husband and wife were white. She had 2 twin black babies. Can't even imagine the shock. The shock. They didn't know there's no recessive black gene by these people. They're 100% white for generations. Yeah, for all generations. No one ever been, intermixed. Not Hispanic, not black, nobody. And they had 2 kids. They had 2, what do you call it? 2 in vitro kids. They were black. Yeah, that was a major scandal. Major scandal. Many years ago. Many years ago. Would it be fulfilling his duties as a father required to have children? No. It's not his sperm. If it be his sperm, different issue. That's a different issue. Yeah, if it's his sperm, very good. Then he would fulfill his obligation. Then he would fulfill his obligation of father and a child. Yes. How do women cope physically, mentally with take care of 10 to 15 children? It's not easy. No one says it's easy. And let's say a person, they like to have Shabbos guests. They have a lot of Shabbos guests. It's also not easy. Right? What makes it easier, though, is at some point, younger kids get older. And if they get older, that means they can do things and they can help out. When they're younger, it's very hard. It's very hard because they can't do anything for themselves. Yeah, so you have to do everything for them. When they start to be able to do things, themselves, it becomes easier. Once kids are older kids look after the younger kids. So I've heard people say it's not true, right? But I've heard people say that, so you have older siblings raising younger siblings. Now, that's not true. They're helping. We'll take them to the parks, we'll take them for walks. The mother's busy doing other things. Okay. They're not raising them. That's a big difference. Now, in some cases, there are kids that parents put a huge amount of responsibility on. Not just taking care of the siblings and whatever. It's about cooking and cleaning and doing other things. I mean, you gotta let them be kids also. Yeah. But a lot of times, a person has more kids. The older kids certainly help out. 100%. Some do more, some do less. Can it be stressful? Sure. But I'll tell you what's more stressful. Imagine a person has one child. They don't have any siblings. Yeah. My oldest child was born. We were the entertainment. We were the entertainment. I'd come home, but I'd be dead tired. It's like, all right, you're in charge the next couple of hours. Now, I'm taking a nap. All right. You have to entertain them. It's only one kid. Yeah. So if they have a sibling, let's say, a couple of years younger, they can do things together if they don't kill each other. Yeah. They can play together. Not all kids like to sit and play by themselves in general. We're not even talking about putting them on screens or other things. We're talking about playing themselves. I had one son that, you can sit down, you put them blocks, Legos, whatever, be there for hours. Hours. Another son, you get bored eventually. I like to do things himself. Yeah. So having one, a person like, I want to have one child. Okay. But you're gonna have to entertain that child. Yeah. When they're younger. Or, they don't have siblings they can play with. Maybe they got friends they can play with this and that, but they don't have anyone in the house. Right? I'm talking about where you could have more kids, not where you can't. So when they get older, at one point I had 4 kids under the age of 6. Yeah, that wasn't so easy. Yeah, it was hard. I'm not gonna say it wasn't. It was hard. But they get older. Yeah, so some of my kids always say, like, what'd you do when we were younger and you didn't have, you didn't have help? We did. We dealt with you. Like one of my kids said today, like they're so thankful that they have their siblings close by, and and in-laws and brothers and sister-in-laws that they can help. When they need help, they need to go out, they need something, whatever, they can sit and babysit. Or they can come over or whatever. Makes it a lot easier. A lot easier when you have that internal structure. I never had that. I told my kids, like, you kiss the ground every day, you have that. Or my kids told me today, it's it's a huge thing. You cannot that you cannot just poo-poo and take it for granted. Yeah, it's a huge help, right? At the same time, if you don't have that, you're on your own. It's hard. Right? I told my kids, like, when it comes to your cousins and this and that, and aunts and uncles, you'll never see them. Like, you're not going to see them that much. So your kids will be very close to their cousins, and they are. I have 11 grandkids. Right now, I have 11 grandkids. My oldest one is 13. Yeah, it's going to be 13 next year. Next year be big bar mitzvah next year. Okay. But, 2 of my kids gave birth at the same time, this time and 2 years ago. The kids they're the same age. Just about the same age. One of them has an older kid, a little bit older. Okay, when they get together, it's chaos. I'm not going to say not. Some are, can be a little bit rambunctious. So, there's one of them, they just like smack this kid around, and he's only got a younger sister. He's not toughened up yet. So, like, he gets smacked around, and someone's always screaming, usually him. Not always, but okay. But these cousins and these siblings are very, very tight because they're relatively close in age. Yeah, that's a huge thing. So I said your kids will have that growing up. Cousins and aunts and this and that. Yeah, I never had it. Right? Not just because I lived here. When I was in the States, I never had it. So, like, we had to do everything on our own, which is harder. Right? Which is definitely harder. If I would have had, siblings, nieces, nephews, cousins, this, that could have helped. That would have made life a lot easier in different ways. A lot easier. Yeah, but I did. So, but this is a whole different thing. I'm not saying siblings are always going to get along, and cousins are always going to get along, and this and that. Yeah, people fight, people argue, this, that. That's part of it. That's part of it. So, like, someone asked me, what do you do when everyone's there? I said, I have earplugs. Sometimes it gets loud. Okay. So I scream with them. They're like, Grandpa, say anyone. Like, why are you screaming? I said, because you're screaming. So I said, I want to be part of the fun, so I'm going to scream also. Yeah. Try not to, like, do too much damage to them also. But anyway, I told one of my daughters gave birth a couple weeks ago to a girl, and she got 3 boys. She had 3 boys, now she had a girl. So these 3 boys are pretty rambunctious, right? Let's just say they're pretty rambunctious. So I told them, came over last week, I said, your sister's not a football, right? She's not a soccer ball, right? They're like, we knew that. It's like, that's not funny. We knew that. We treat her very carefully. We don't pick her up by ourselves. This and that. And then one of them just smacked, their brother for no reason. That's part of the course. Okay, my daughter's got to educate them. Good luck. But it's okay. It can be hard. Yes, it can be very, it can be very, it can be very challenging. But when they get older, they can do a lot. And when they can do a lot, it takes a lot of pressure off the parents. Or I get to say, like, they're like, who used to do the dishes? I said, me. I said, after Shabbos, I said, me. I said, you couldn't do it. I said, when you got older enough, I passed on the responsibility, right? You guys got to do it. So, but that's it, right? But when you have siblings and nieces and nephews and cousins and this and that, it's a whole different family dynamics. Whole different family dynamics. Yeah, and when a person's married, you get the other side also to help out. And they're also probably going to have a number of kids that, whatever. So that's very good, right? That's huge. I never had that. I remind my kids of that also. I raised you with no help. So stop complaining and whining. You have so much, you have so much help. That's good. Never take advantage of it. Never forget that. That's a huge thing. But these cousins see each other a lot, or as much as we can, we try and get together. That was huge. It's a beautiful thing. If they all got together, my house, that's 21 people. It's loud. I got a big enough table for everyone, but it's loud. That's true. And they come and they make a mess and they this. Sometimes they clean up more, they clean up less. Okay. Can it be stressful? Yeah, it can be stressful. Okay. Life is stressful. Is it worth it? Yeah, it's worth it. It's not worth it. Some people that can't handle having so many kids, yeah, I wouldn't tell them to have so many kids. Right? But people in the secular world think it's crazy. I think it's just like absolutely crazy. Right? But again, is it worth it? You ask them if it's worth it. You ask them if it's worth it. They'll tell you it's worth it. They'll tell you it's worth it. But it gets easy. People told me that. It was very hard to hear until it happened. Right? And that is, it gets easier because they get older. And they can do things for themselves. So you don't have to do everything for them. But, you're trying to get 2, 3 kids or more. You're trying to get them out at a certain time and, getting them dressed and getting their stuff together. And then, even with 2 people helping, it can be stressful. 100%. 100%. Is it worth it? It's worth it. Yeah. I don't know. Anyone who has a big family said it wasn't worth it. Yeah. Was it easy? Oh, no one's going to tell you it's easy. No one's going to tell you it's easy. No question. Is it worth it? I don't think there's any question. What's the best approach to having older children help out without turning bad or older children become resentful? To give them incentives, pay them an allowance, right? Make a chart with them. If they help out with this, you'll do this for them. After so much, you give them incentives, bribe them. Bribery works. Yeah, it definitely works. But eventually you won't need to bribe them. They'll get used to doing it. They're not going to say, okay, I want something more. Like extortion. They're going to say, yeah, it was good enough. I got a bike. Now I want something else. Okay, it's different. Right? When they get older, it's different. But there's also a maturity level. But if they were never used to doing things when they were younger, it's going to be very hard to get them to do things when they're older. That I would say. Right? So people should, you have a chart. This is, okay, this is what you're going to do during the week. These are chore obligations. That's it. Right? This is what you have to do. Right? You make it appropriate for their age. But if you never did it, they never helped out when they get older. It's not going to say impossible. I don't want to depress anyone. It's going to be very hard. I think it's going to be very hard to get them to, to do it. Right? Some kids, enjoy doing this. Other kids hate it. Right? But even if they hate it, you got to try and get them to do it anyway. Right? One of them is with incentives. Sometimes incentives doesn't work. Incentives is a big thing, though. Right? I call it bribery. That's really what it is. right? But, it works. It gives them incentive to do things because they know what they're going to get at the end. They know it's something worthwhile they're going to get, so they'll do it. Now, are they going to do it begrudgingly? They have a vested interest because they want something, right? If someone has to get up at 6 a.m, they're going to spend the next whole day at an amusement park with their friends or whatever. Guess what? They're going to get up at 6 a.m. They're not going to complain. Yeah, they're not going to complain they're too tired or this and that. They're going to get up with a gusto. Why? Because they know what the day entails. They're going to have a whole day to be at this amusement park. I'm not talking about whether it's a good thing or not. I'm just saying, something they're excited to do. Yeah, something they're absolutely ecstatic to do. Guess what? They're going to be motivated to do it. Extremely motivated to do it. So this is the same thing. If they know they're getting something in the end, or you make a chart, whatever, that's motivation. Now again, at some point they get older and you won't have to do that, right? But it's it has to be age appropriate. But if a person never helped out, it doesn't mean you can't do it. You can't give incentives to try and get them to do it. When they're older, it's harder. It's harder. It's like if someone came to Judaism or came out of Christian or whatever, and their kids are much older. It's very hard. It's very hard to put them in the process. Yeah, because they're already set in their ways in certain ways. Say they're teenagers. I'm not gonna say it's impossible. There are teenagers that have come around and this and that. Okay. Yeah, but it's harder because of the environment, the friends, the school, this, that. It's a whole different thing. So it's no different if a person's set in their ways, or they're not used to certain things, or they've never been taught certain things, and now you're trying to teach them when they're older. It's harder. Even if they're more mature, it doesn't matter. It's harder. Don't think it's impossible. Don't think it's impossible. If you only have one child, that's some sort of blemish. It depends. For a person trying to have two, if you can't have two or you didn't. Someone asked me that the person ended up converting, but this woman asked me, she was in her late 50s probably when she asked me this, was it wrong? I never want to have kids. According to the Torah. So the Torah says you should have kids. Yeah, even as a non-Jew. Yeah, but what I told her was kind of harsh, but I said, when it comes to having kids, if a woman would say, I would never want to have kids in general. It's not normal. According to the nature of a person, people can rip me to shreds for saying this, being old-fashioned and sexist and whatever. The nature of a woman in general is to want to have a child. At least one. At least one. Now, to say a woman never wants to have a child is something wrong. And society will convince you with that. How many people, movers and shakers in the world, women, never had kids? Because they didn't want. Why? Because what was more important? Their career. You don't want to have, body change, other things, right? It was more about them. That's being selfish. What if they wouldn't be good taking care of the kids? Okay, maybe they shouldn't have kids. Yeah. Maybe they shouldn't, but that's not normal. What you have today is career comes first. Career comes first, family comes later. But you get burned by that. I know people that have gotten burned by that. They want to have a family. Now, whatever, by the time they finally met someone and it's much later, whatever. Or sometimes you just don't meet the right person. I know someone now in their 60s. Get married for the first time. Never had a boyfriend for very long or whatever. Very successful. Very, very successful. Never have kids. They're in their early 60s. Okay, at least they found someone. Thank God the person was Jewish. Okay. Very good. But, I know exactly the story. They weren't looking to marry. I think they were looking for a long time and just they never found the right person. It can also happen. So what happens if they never, a person never gets married, never has kids? Okay, it's a mitzvah you didn't do. Definitely a mitzvah you didn't do. Right, but that should be the norm according to the Torah. Today you can't even say that. I mean, it's like blasphemy to say that, right? Right now, it's in law that there are only two genders in America. Okay, that's pathetic. You have to go that far to do it. What if a couple's not ready for children? You see people have 3 children, 1 woman, divorced, 2 children. Okay, That the divorce is on the rise. Divorce is on the rise. There are many times you hear a person got married, they got divorced after 2 months, 3 months. Yeah. The system of marriage, even in the Orthodox community, is not foolproof. It's definitely not, foolproof. For sure. I think it's, it's the best system out there. The majority of people stay married, even, let's say it's a 10% divorce rate. But why do people get divorced in general? There could be serious problems. I'm not saying not. I think part of the problem, though, is secular influences of society have creeped into the Orthodox community, and now they're looking at things in a totally different way than really according to the Torah. Right? They're putting secular values on things that don't belong, that totally don't belong. And they're making comparisons to things they should never make comparisons to because they see what's out there. Right? They see the secular world. That has a major effect. And has had a major effect, right, on that. So you're right. A person gets married, they have a couple kids, they end up getting divorced. So again, each case, you can't make comparisons of cases that are different. Yeah. You can't overgeneralize it. Wow, this person had 2 kids, they got divorced. This person had 3 kids, got divorced. Anyone who gets divorced, it's the Gemara says it's like tears come down from heaven on the altar. Doesn't mean you can't get divorced, right? And there are many reasons why a person should get divorced. Even if you have a couple kids or whatever, okay. Some people may not have kids straight away to see if the marriage is going to stick or not. Potentially. They have to have good reason to use, not to have children. To use, conception, whatever. That a person will not have children. So a person will say, well, that's better, maybe. Let them be married for a year, let's see how it goes. And then they see really it's going to go and they're happy, so let them have kids. It doesn't always work out that way, right? Maybe that is a better idea in some ways. But you are seeing a phenomenon today in the Orthodox community where people are getting divorced after like a month or 2 months or 6 months, right? That's a problem, right? Not a potential number of reasons why, but from experts that I've heard talk about it have, come to one major conclusion. And that is that either they weren't ready for marriage, or they got forced into something, or they had different values, or they got values, let's say, from the secular world that caused problems. Now, there are a number of issues. It's not a one answer, not a one-stop answer over here. There'll be a lot of different factors involved as well. But yeah, like someone told me many years ago, in the Orthodox community, more people getting divorced. Okay, what's in the secular world? 50%? Some places it's higher. The marriage, if a person gets married today, most likely they're going to get divorced at least once, right? At least in the secular world, right? So even if in the Orthodox community, let's say it's on the rise, let's say it's on the rise. I don't think it's 10%. Yeah, maybe it is. I don't know. Yeah, let's say it's 10%. In the secular community, it's not even close. Not even close, much higher, right? So, it's cognitive dissonance. Someone say, see, it's getting higher in the Jewish community. Okay. And what is it in the secular community? See, it's getting higher in the Jewish community. It's like talking to a brick. Yeah, anyone like talking to a brick? I don't. But that's the argument. That, I said, but in the secular world, what are the stats? They don't want to hear what the stats were. I said, you know what the stats are. 50, 60% divorce rate. Easy. Yeah. So you have a 6-time chance, 5 or 6 times higher chance of getting divorced in the secular world. Don't tell me, in the Orthodox community, it's getting bigger, right? The amount of people getting divorced is more. Okay. Are we 6 times the amount? No, not even close. You say, see, it's a stigma to get divorced. You know how many people get divorced? A lot of people get divorced in the Orthodox community. Yeah, it's not a good thing. It's not a stigma as it used to be. Certainly not. So that's not true. Yeah, but, if like anything else, you're going to work at it. If you can't work at it, it's not going to go. Okay, so you have to get divorced. Yeah, it definitely exists. It's not a stigma like it used to be. For sure not. But it's not even close to the secular world. It's a stupid argument. Like a lot of people say, see, it's getting bigger. The amount is getting bigger. When it's 6 times, tell me. When it's double, tell me. It's still a better institution than the secular world. And what's the reason? Because we have better values. Much better values. I don't think it's even close. What if the husband's insane? That's a different issue. Got mental health issues, you shouldn't get married unless he overcomes them. Can someone who's bipolar get divorced, get married? Yes. I know a few people bipolar are happily married many years. They have to have a psychiatrist, they have a psychologist, they're on medication, okay. They have what to deal with, very good. They can get married. If someone has serious mental health issues, they should never get married until they're cured or until it's under control. For sure not. Right? Who's going to marry them? Nobody should marry them. Yeah, they're not fit to be married. Right? So they shouldn't get married, right? Should he have children? No. Can I just buy a parrot instead for company? You can have a parrot for company. You can have a pet. Okay. Yeah. Gemara says it's better for a woman to get married than not be married. Yeah. For a guy to be married, it's certainly better. So, overcome certain urges, etc. But not to get married just for the sake of getting married. Right? I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say, well, it's just that, marry somebody, whatever, so you don't have these issues. Yeah, I wouldn't tell someone to get married because of that. Right? You have to be the right person. But a person should not be celibate. Definitely not. The Torah says very clear, man should not be alone. Man should not, don't say woman, huh? It says man should not be alone. Would probably be better. Yeah, they're probably happier without men. But the Gemara doesn't say that. The Gemara says better for a woman to be married than not be married. Yeah, for a lot of different reasons. But again, you're not going to get married for the sake of getting married, right? And you're not really into the other person and this and that. It'd be a disaster. Be an absolute disaster. Someone mental health is should never get married until they're at a certain point where they could. But should a person in general get married? Yes. Now, is that going to stop someone from converting? If they tell the basis they don't want to get married? No. Not going to stop it. They could use it as an excuse, but it's not going to stop it. It will not stop a conversion. They could ask you why, whatever. Some people got burnt. Yeah, they trust issues and different things, and they were married before they have no interest. Okay, that's not going to stop someone getting for converting. And if someone says that that it's for a rabbinical or say, well, you have to get married, we have to look to get married, otherwise we're not going to convert you. That's not true. That is totally false. Yeah. A person should want to get married. Again, I know there are hang-ups and issues and relations they had before. Okay. Right? But I wouldn't tell someone to get married just to say you get married unless you get, unless some of these hang-ups get taken care of. Because then you're not helping anyone by getting married. Yeah, you're gonna hurt yourself and the other person. Right? So it's not just about getting married for the sake of getting married. Right? But again, is it better for a person to be married? Yes. Does it mean it's going to be easy? Nothing's easy. Nothing's easy. Right? I mentioned yesterday. That in my podcast that for a guy to be married, he has to love his wife more than himself. Nobody loves anyone more than themselves. Right? I spoke a lot about that yesterday. Nobody loves anyone more than themselves. Right? In general, but you got to do things that you would normally do for yourself, for your spouse. And you have to work at it, right? Take a flower. Take a flower. You don't give it sunlight. You don't give it water. Die. Pretty get married 30 years. It can be very stale. You just do things by rote. Okay. It'll die, potentially. Yeah. When a lot of marriages potentially end after the kids are out of the house. Okay. Then you're back alone. And then what? The only thing you had in common, which was the kids. That's the problem. That is definitely an issue. I mean, it's a serious issue when people retire and different things. Where do we find the laws of marriage? Seems unmarried might be these supposed to be successful. They're marriage books. They're Jewish marriage books out there. Give people definite guidelines. It's sad people had to write these books because it's a lost art. It's a lost art. It's very easy to have a child in general, according to biology. It's not easy to raise children. Yeah. So and there are books on that. How to raise children successfully. All right, I'm going to stop here. I just every Tuesday and Thursday, 10 o'clock Eastern Time, 5 o'clock Israel Time. Anyone has any questions, feel free. Find me on Facebook at Michael Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com. Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. There I get videos, Q&As, ethics for fathers. Book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com. RBBI, CHIM, COFFMAN.